My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the resurrection, being the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. I pointed out that in numerous formal public debates, and I want to tell you, in countless informal exchanges, I have asked my all-millennial and post-millennial opponent, are your eschatological hopes based upon, taken from, God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel? They have said, no, my eschatological hope is Adamic and Abrahamic. Or they have said, Abrahamic and Davidic. It is not from the law of Moses. Well, as I suggested to you in the last video, that is absolutely false. It's the creation of a second gospel, an unknown gospel. And yet people say, well, Preston, you're just focusing on Israel. In fact, I've heard some people say lately, well, I will sure be glad when we can get past a focus on Israel. Well, folks, listen to me. Jesus said salvation is of the Jews. Salvation flows from the Jews until Israel's promises were fulfilled. Salvation could not go to the world. That's the biblical pattern. Secondly, what we need to understand is that, as Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, 4 and 5, there is one hope. Now, here's something for you to consider. If resurrection is the fulfillment of Adamic promises and not the promises of Israel, why did Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15:22, talk about the Adamic problem of death, as in Adam all men die, even so in Christ shall all men be made alive? Okay, so there's the Adamic problem. Why didn't Paul say, and that Adamic death will be overcome at the end of time? Instead, why did he say that the Adamic death would be overcome at the time of the fulfillment of Isaiah 25 and Hosea 13, Daniel 12, and Ezekiel 37? Do you see what I'm saying here? Paul agreed that the resurrection would be to overcome the Adamic death. The question is, where did he put that fulfillment? He did not put it at the end of time. He did not put it at the end of the Christian age. Why did he put it at the end of the Mosaic age, in fulfillment of Moses, the law, and the prophets? The same thing with Abraham. If resurrection promise belonged to Abraham and not Israel, then why does Galatians chapter 3 and 4 talk about God positing the Abrahamic inheritance? Well, what was the Abrahamic inheritance? The Abrahamic inheritance was the heavenly city, the heavenly country, and the better resurrection. Hebrews 11:35. Why, if the reception of the Abrahamic resurrection promise is different from the hope of Israel, why didn't Paul put the reception of the Abrahamic inheritance at the end of the Christian age, instead of saying that it was at the end of the Old Covenant law, the law of Moses? The law was under a schoolmaster to bring us under Christ. After Christ is come, we're no longer under a schoolmaster. And somebody wants to say, well, yeah, Paul's saying that the law had already passed away. No, that's not going to work. What did he mean there when he says, after Christ has come, we're no longer under a schoolmaster? Does that mean when Jesus was born, the law passed away? I don't know of anybody that would take that position. People want to say, well, okay, that's the cross. That's not the coming of the Lord. Paul has in mind, in this after Christ has come, Paul has in mind that the Abrahamic inheritance would be when the Old Covenant law came to its end. When would the inheritance be given? Well, Galatians 4:21 and following teaches us that the inheritance would not be received under the law through the law and by those of of Israel after the flesh. It would only be when Israel after the flesh would be cast out for persecuting the children of promise, the Abrahamic seed through faith. Do you see what I'm trying to convey here? Paul had one eschatological hope. When we dichotomize the resurrection narrative and say, well, I'm looking for the fulfillment of the Adamic promise of resurrection. Okay, that's fine. When would it be fulfilled? Guess what? Paul said in Romans 16:20, and now the God of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. That's a direct echo from Genesis 3:15 and 16, the ultimate victory, i.e. resurrection. But when did Paul say it would happen? It would happen shortly. You see? In the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel. What we're trying to say here is the Adamic hope, the Adamic resurrection hope, was assimilated into and became the same as the Abrahamic resurrection hope. The Abrahamic resurrection hope was assimilated into, now watch this, Galatians chapter 4 says, now this I say that the law, which was 40 years after what? After the Abrahamic covenant, cannot annul the covenant. But the law was added to Abraham, carried the Abrahamic promise through the Mosaic law, but the Abrahamic covenant, the Abrahamic resurrection promise, could never be fulfilled under or by or through obedience to the law. That's why Paul says, if a law could have been given that could have given life, then verily righteousness would have been through the law. No. But that doesn't mean that the law did not carry on the Abrahamic resurrection promise. And once again, when therefore would the Abrahamic resurrection promise be fulfilled? When Isaiah and Daniel and Ezekiel and Hosea would be fulfilled at the end of the Mosaic age. When that old covenant age was taken away, the Adamic promise, the Abrahamic promise would be fulfilled. This is why Paul said he had one hope, and it was found in Moses, the law, and the prophets. And we've got more on this absolutely essential, critical, foundational understanding that the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 would be at the end of the Old Covenant age in fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, His promises to Adam, and His promises to Moses in the law and the prophets. You don't want to miss it. We'll see you on the flip side.